This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg, author of American Veda, our podcast, Spirit Matters, found at spiritmatterstalk.com. Our focus, contemporary spirituality, and our guest today is Sridhar Stephen Silberfein, originally from New York. He has been in the movement for the development of consciousness and raising awareness for many years. He is known, and I want to talk to you about this today, for bringing Swami Satchidananda to Woodstock. And I want to also say he's the founder of Bhakti Fest, which is a tremendous festival held every year. But more on all that as we go into the interview. Thank you so very much for taking the time to come on today, Sridhar.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. Look forward to it.
Sridhar, you've had, not to give away our ages here, but you go back in the world of yoga and meditation and Indian spirituality for back to the early mid-60s.
Yeah, it's been around 50 years.
And, it's the 50th anniversary of the Summer of Love now. And so you've had a lot of experiences, and we'd love to explore that with you. But let's begin with a little background on you. I know you could talk for an hour just about your own experience, and we'll get to that. But you have Bhakti Fest coming up in September, and we want to call our listeners' attention to it. Tell us what the origin of Bhakti Fest was, and you can bring in your previous experience in that context.
Yeah, good. Actually, that goes back to the Woodstock story, which I might as well get into now. So when I was hanging around with Michael Lang and Artie Kornfeld in New York in the late 60s, we used to go over their house and hang out and discuss things. And one day they said to me, Sridhar, what do you think is missing from the new festival that we're putting on? I said, well, you got every name or to-be-great name, because a lot of people were just going to be discovered then. And but you're missing the spiritual element. And they said, what do you mean? I said, I had one in mind, and to do the invocation. They said, okay, you produce that segment. So I went over to see Swami Satchidananda, who was my yoga teacher. He was my yoga guru at the time. I met him in 1968 when Peter Max brought him over to the country. He eventually created Integral Yoga Institute and was a big forerunner for Hatha Yoga here in America. Said, Swami, you're invited to come to do the invocation. He said he didn't even know what Woodstock was. I explained it to him. So we flew him up by helicopter. All this now that I'm saying, it's actually in the movie, in the director's cut. So we flew him in on the helicopter. We got out. We're in the back area, discussing it. He's resting in the tent and stuff like that we had set up. And the Woodstock was very late in starting, a couple hours late. And one of the reasons was that the first group that was supposed to open up Woodstock got on the stage and got so panicked and so fearful that I ran off the stage and I ran into the bushes. And a lot of people don't know that part of the story because nobody ever revealed who that was. Anyhow, they grabbed Richie Havens and they got him up on the stage to warm up and strum up and get his guitar tuned in. And you see me walking on the stage with Swamiji, and at that moment, I realized there was nobody to introduce Swami. So I said to, I was a young kid then, and I didn't know too much. I said to Richie, do you mind introducing Swami Satchidananda? He looked at me. He was sweating bullets. I said, get the fuck out of here, kid. Leave me alone. He was so panicked himself, right?
Right.
But then he went on, and then right after he went on, Chip Monk, who turned out to be the moderator, he announced that he introduced Swami. We had a beautiful invocation. It's up on the website of the old Woodstock Festival. Anyhow, and then we stood in the back looking at the crowd, and I said to him, Swami, someday we're going to have these amount of people chanting the names of God. And he said to me, I hope so, Sridhar. And we segued in 40 years later, almost to the day. We started in September, and the festival was in August, and we created the first Bhakti Fest in 2009.
Well, it's a great story.
Well, and you haven't yet reached the 400,000 mark, but you get a few thousand people every year out to the desert, man.
Yeah, well, we have 2 festivals a year currently in Southern California. Next year we're going to be expanding to more, but we have a festival in May called the Shakti Fest, and that's a 6-year-old festival that I wanted to make more for the goddesses, for the women. Mostly all the presenters in Shakti Fest in May are women yoga teachers, women music act, women workshops, and I created that for that particular reason. And then our festival, which is the Bhakti Fest in September, is 9 years old. This is our 9th anniversary. Next year we're looking forward to our 10th anniversary, which is really going to be a big blowout event for us.
Mm-hmm.
So
Sridhar,
what we can't.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So we're known for like the #1 conscious gathering of yoga and sacred music in the country. I mean, there's other copycat festivals, but this is a real spiritual festival, meaning we don't have alcohol. I've been approached by alcohol and wine companies throughout the ages to come and let them vent. And I said, no, because we need to have a place where we don't do what we do every single day. We need to go to a gathering, to a movement, a festival, that we don't have to get drunk or stoned to really see the potential of what we have inside of us. And we're an all-vegetarian festival. We're actually the only one that prescribes to that. And these are things that I feel are very, very important for people to maintain and develop a deepening spiritual life. And by that I mean, discipline, which we really all need to maintain, because in today's world it's so crazy and it's so convoluted, and the government is not for the people, the corporations are against the people. I mean, we're living in a very isolated situation as individuals. So to come to an event that's built on spiritual community is very, very important, and that's what we maintain, and that's what we'll always maintain.
Mm-hmm. Sridhar, I was reading about you, and one of the things that was fascinating is back to your beginning of your spiritual journey. You were experimenting, like many people back in the early 60s, with psychedelics and that sort of stuff. But it was actually your aunt, somebody from the previous generation, who turned you on to meeting your first spiritual teacher. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was an interesting time. I had just graduated college in 1962. I didn't know what I was going to do. I eventually moved out to California for my first time at that point. But in 62, she said to me, why don't you go see this guy, Rudy? And because her son was studying with Rudy. And I said, okay, fine, I'll go down. And he had this really incredible Oriental art and antique store downtown New York. And when I went in there, I just had an amazing experience. And then he invited me to stay that night for his class. I didn't know what to expect. But everybody went upstairs to the second floor. And in that room were pictures, big, huge pictures of gurus, specifically Bhagavan Nityananda and Swami Muktananda. But when I saw this big blow-up picture of Bhagavan Nityananda from Ganeshpuri, India, I immediately felt a sensation going through my body, which later on I realized that I had received Shakti Pot from a picture. And then Rudy had his class, and he had this eye meditation where he would cast his eyes and his glance to everybody, and you had an experience in that class, and I had one. And then I left, and went on my business to go move to California. But in 1964, I actually was a smuggler at that point. I must add that because that's usually not in my bio. But at this point, I'm revealing everything to everybody.
The statute of limitations has passed. Really.
Correct. And I'll tell you the reason why that is important, because I was one of the first marijuana smugglers from Mexico. I would smuggle in like 20, 30 keys a week. In 1964, I would drive down there and that's a whole long story. You'd have to read it in my book.
I probably bought from you in 1965.
I'm sure you did. And then I would ship everything to New York, and my distributors there would, and I was making like $5,000 a week in 1964. So, I mean, we were way ahead of the curve then. And then I said, I think it's time to just pack it up and go over to Europe. So I grabbed a friend of mine in New York, and we flew to Europe. I paid for everything. We're traveling around, and we wound up in Morocco. And I went up to the hills of Morocco called the Rif Mountains. That's where the word Rifa comes from. A lot of people don't know that, but it's in northern Morocco. And then I went up there and I brought down a couple of 100 pounds on muleback into a little town called Tetuan, northern Morocco. And I had these guys chopping this up and making it into almost powder so we can bring it over across Spain to England, and we were going to make hashish out of it. Long story short, we get on the boat to go back over the ferry over the Straits of Gibraltar, and we get to Spain, but they were obviously waiting for us on a tip-off, and we got arrested, and we got put into prison, and they only wanted one of us. My friend was flipping out. I thought I was going to be the big shot, of course, and take the rap for him, which was a big mistake, but that's part of the comic dance. And so finally, it was interesting because I was in 5 different prisons while I was in Spain. Really hardcore prisons, because during that time, 1964, the dictator, Francisco Franco, was still doing his thing in Spain, and it was a very brutal regime, so people were not taken very good care of, especially in the prison system, I must say. So rather than get into too much detail, when I was first in solitary confinement, for 2 weeks straight, no shower, no bathroom, nothing. I had a hole in the pit of the cell, and there was no bed. It was an iron thing to sleep on with a thin little tiny mat, but the mat was filled of these very serious bugs, and they got all underneath my skin from head to toe, and I was scratching myself bloodied. I was a bloody mess, and I realized at that moment, Stephen was my name at that point, I said, either you're going to really go deep inside yourself and figure this out, or you are going to commit suicide. And at that moment, I remembered that class that I went to from Rudy, from a year or two earlier, a couple of years earlier, and I applied some of those meditation techniques that I learned really quickly. I didn't know what any of that was, but I went deep inside, and I managed to survive and that period. And then it turns out that my uncle was partners with Congressman Emanuel Sellers, from Brooklyn, and he was in charge of the House Armed Services Committee, and his best friend was the Marquis de Val, who was the ambassador from Spain. He called him up, and he said, just take him out on bail, and we'll work it out. And Marquis said, there is no bail system in Spain. Once you get in there, you never come out. And he asked them to make an exception. I was the first person in the history of Spain that was let out on bail of $183 or something like that. And my father came over. He was a New York Jewish businessman, and he sees me on the opposite side of the gates when he came to visit me in prison. It was a very sad moment for the family, and
I'll bet.
it was a very powerful thing. And so I got out on bail. I got to Madrid, and we were staying at the Hilton Hotel, and we were waiting for the trial, which was supposed to come up in a couple of weeks, and our lawyers were at it. And I said, Dad, I'm really tired. I want to go down. I'm going to go down to the Canary Islands for a couple of days and rest. Call me and let me know, or I'll call you, and we'll figure it out. There was no cell phone, so that, I would have to find my place and then call him. So I was down there for a couple of days on the beach, and 3-4 days later, I see, I'm hanging out with some people I met and doing the same things I always did at that point of my life. And then I see some guy walking down the beach in a suit and a tie, and I'm making fun of the guy. I said, and he gets closer and closer. It's my father. And I run down to the beach. Dad, what are you doing here? He said, we need to pack up and escape immediately. They're going to give you 6 years and 1 month and 1 day as your sentence. We just heard from the lawyer. So we went back to the hotel. We packed up our bags, and we flew from Canary Islands to Lisbon to the Azores to JFK.
Wow.
Turned out that when they let me out of prison the last time, they gave me the envelope that I came in there, which was my watch, my ring, and my $2 I had in there. But the one other thing that they gave me back was
your passport. Yeah.
Right? Since it was the first person out on bail, they didn't know anything about keeping passports, and that's how we got out of there.
Well, you've made history, Sridhar, in more ways than one. So you mentioned Rudy. We should let our listeners know that Rudy was Albert Rudolph, a Brooklyn boy who was one of the really early adopters of Indian spiritual teachings and became Swami Rudrananda, a.k.a. Rudy. And
correct.
I discovered, who he was many years later. I never met him because he passed in the early 70s in a plane crash. But I must have walked past his import shop, Asian import shop with the Buddhas and everything,
right.
Hundreds of times growing up in New York City, and I had no idea what was going on upstairs in all those years. But now Rudy was the person who brought Muktananda here, and you were part of that.
Yes, so that's a good segue into that next piece, which was I started studying with Rudy also in 1968. Again, when I moved, after I got out of prison, I was really, really at the low period of my time, and I was living out in Long Beach where I grew up with my mom and dad. And one day she just went into New York and came back and said, "Okay, you're moving to New York." I said, "Where?" "I got you an apartment on 72nd Street in Central Park West."
That's a good neighborhood to
a big street, yeah.
Yeah, in January 1965, I moved in there, and it was the penthouse of the Oliver Cromwell Hotel, which was right across the street from the Dakota, where John Lennon got assassinated. Right. And I had an apartment on the top floor that, at that point, was $150 a month.
Wow.
And I moved there, and I did many things. I was a movie maker, and I started then I got into the real estate business, and that's really what I did for the major 5 years that I was in New York. But at the same time, I was still maintaining my Hatha Yoga studies with Swami Satchidananda in the Woodstock piece. But in 1965, 66, I started studying with Rudy again. And then around 1968, it was decided that Muktananda would come into the America in 1970. So we all chipped in and put monies together in a big bowl and eventually came up with $10,000. Muktananda came over with his entourage and Labor Day weekend, and we had the first program up at Big Indian at Rudy's ashram in Big Indian, New York, and Labor Day weekend. And that's who was there at that point was Hilda Charlton, Ramdas, Swami Venkateshananda, and a whole bunch of other people. Not a lot of people, and I found myself sitting there, and that first couple of nights, I was, they invited me in to sleep in Muktananda's bedroom on the floor by his feet, and I had an amazing, amazing experience with Muktananda. He was my first guru, I must say, and I was with him from 1970 to 1982 when he left his body. And at that point, he turned around to me and Ramdas and said, "I want you guys to organize our tour." My tour around the U.S. in 1970, and I didn't know organization, but I didn't even know Ramdas. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and we got thrown into the pot together, and we've been friends ever since that. Really intimate friends, actually.
All right,
terrific.
Sridhar, you became one of the yoga teachers at the Integral Yoga Institute. It was 500 West End Avenue. What was that like then? And at that point in your life, were you like, okay, I'm really committed to being a yogi. I'm going to clean up my life. I'm going to live this lifestyle. I'm under the influence of Satchidananda and all these other spiritual people. Was that like a big turning point, or Or was it still a process where you were going back and forth between your old world and the new world?
Well, I've always been in the old world and the new world because you can't give up
Right.
the old world because the old world and the new world are the same. But yes, I did make a commitment to going deeper in my sadhana at that point. I became a vegetarian, and to this day I'm still a vegetarian, almost like 50 some odd years later. So I've been hardcore because when I moved to California in 1970, I actually started the first natural food store in Southern California, in Topanga Canyon, and I maintained that store for 12 years, and it was a very real. Everybody came to that store because it was a model of how to live your life with better food and better understanding. I'll segue into that later, but yes, that was a time that I decided that yes, I want to devote my life to spirituality. I really feel that that was the way for me, and I didn't want to tell anybody else what to do because everybody has to find out these things on their own. You can suggest, you can give guidance, but we're not changing anybody, and nobody's changing us. So all that comes from within.
So Sridhar, now you're in the 9th year of Bhakti Fest, and you've been observing the spiritual scene in America for 50 years or more. I'm curious what your observations are about how things have changed. What is the current generation? You get a fairly young crowd at Bhakti Fest. In fact, maybe you could tell us who comes and what the demographic is. But how is this current generation of spiritual seekers and participants different from our generation in the 60s?
Well, they're trying. This generation is actually trying, but nothing will compare to the openness and the understanding that we had in the 60s, because we really, the government couldn't control us. We were just really free to do whatever we wanted to do, and basically now that's not happening. We're in complete control and domination by the governments, by big corporations. They're telling you everything to do, from how to eat to how to sleep to what to watch, and this technology really, the younger generation has a chance, but if they continue to adhere to the technology that's put in front of us, there is no chance for anybody, because instead of spending, the 10, 12, 15 hours on phones and emails every single day, take some of that time to do meditation, to do japa,
right.
To listen to some music, to read some spiritual books. Nobody's reading anything.
Are the people coming to Bhakti Fest different in that regard?
A little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The reason they're coming to Bhakti Fest is because they want to dive deeper. They want a program. They want to get on a schedule. They don't want to maintain themselves this way. People don't even want to leave when Monday comes along. They're asking us, hey, can we hang out here and stuff like that? We got to shoo them away because, we have a contract with the retreat center. But anyhow, I tell people, take what you get here, the love and the compassion and the service, and to help other human beings. That's the key. That's of all the things that I've learned in my whole life was how to help other human beings, how to do seva, S-E-V-A, which means service in Hindi, and how to do more of that. That's why we definitely take a portion of what we receive every festival and give to some of our charities, mostly in India, because it's so important that we forget about taking care of each other. That's really what it comes down to, is forgiveness and taking care of each other. That we have to forgive each other for past situations that we've done to each other, because none of us are saints. We're all still learning. We spend our whole life learning, and we make mistakes, and we make errors in judgment, and make assumptions and gossip all the time. And we have to say, I'm sorry if I hurt you in any way, shape, or form by anything I've done in my words, deeds, or action, and please forgive me. And I forgive you for anything that you've done to me in the same way. So it's a two-way street, and I think that's a very important place to visit when we're having a disagreement with anybody else, or in in our relationships or with our kids or our parents and stuff like that.
Sridhar, I'm wondering, at Bhakti Fest, you have a number of really fabulous speakers. And by the way, for our listeners, we have it all posted up on our site here, where the podcast is about Bhakti Fest and other things that are mentioned on the in the interview. But I'm wondering if there's, we know who the gurus were that emerged in the '60s and the spiritual teachers. Are there any new, younger teachers that are emerging that are gaining in popularity that maybe Phil and I don't know about?
Yeah, definitely. And we tend to invite them. We're actually one of the few vehicles that some of these new people can come and give a talk to or have a workshop and have people spend time with them. One of them is Radha Swami, who is an ex-Jewish guy from Chicago.
We've had him on the show.
Oh,
fabulous guy.
So,
Phil and I have both met him. Tremendous human being, great book, lovely person.
One of my dear, dear friends, and he just came out with his second book. He's been coming since the beginning. I met him through a real deep friend of ours called Shamdas, who introduced me to India. And I go spend time with him in India once or twice a year. Mm-hmm. He comes here. I just was with him in L.A. A week or two ago before I went to Toronto. And this year we have Prem Baba coming. Baba is a newer sensation from Brazil. He started off as a therapist, a psychologist, and then he incorporated ayahuasca in his teachings and went to India, had a profound realization, and now he's mixing the ayahuasca with the Eastern spiritual understanding, but not too much ayahuasca while he's here in the U.S.
No alcohol, but ayahuasca.
No, he's not even doing that either, and he's not, of course, nobody's allowed to do any of that. Not allowed, we don't monitor that, but people don't need that when they come to Bhakti Fest.
Yeah.
But anyhow, he's coming, and he's going to give 4 days of workshops and lectures, and that should be great. He spends a couple of months in India where he has programs every single day in India, in Rishikesh, where 1,200, 1,300 people come every day. So he has a really good message. He's got a lot of love and a lot of compassion. I like him, and I wanted him to come.
Speaking
if I could, Phil, just let me follow up on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that you mentioned Radhanath Swami, and before that you were talking about how, service to other people, helping other people is an important part of spirituality. Well, what we've noticed in a number of people we've interviewed, and Radhanath Swami is a prime example of this, is that here's somebody, he's on the international board of the Hare Krishna movement, he's a monk, he's deeply involved in his spiritual practice, but he also runs a nonprofit every day that feeds, I think, over 200,000 kids lunch in Mumbai, India, every day. So he's an example of what you were talking about. Go ahead, Phil. Yeah,
absolutely. He. It's one thing to pay lip service to service, lip service to service, because that's what most of everybody does. But to be out there and actually are actively doing that without looking for anything in return, and that's what real karma yoga, that's what real service is all about. You can't get, everybody knows, why Wanderlust, who I love, they stopped having kirtan at their festivals, and I asked Jeff, who is the producer, I said, why did you do that? He said, there's no money in kirtan. And they're a very money-orientated festival, and that's why they have big sponsors, and they make huge amounts of money from their sponsors. We don't have that. We have small sponsors. We're very select. We won't take any monies from anybody that we don't believe in what they're doing, and vice versa. And this is not a festival that anybody's going to do to get rich, because nobody is. And then we're very fortunate that the grace has bestowed a longevity to our festival, because we have actually maintained a proper way that I think is the reason why it's successful.
I have a question for you about gurus. You are one of the rare people who have known a lot of gurus over the course of your years, and a lot of spiritual teachers, probably a number of self-proclaimed enlightened masters. But you've gotten to know them not just as a person in the audience when they do satsang or give a discourse, but you've gotten to know them because you've had to do business with them, you've traveled with them, you've hosted them. What should people know about gurus? What have you learned over the years about gurus and spiritual teachers and the human beings that they are?
Right. Well, first, there's a big difference between teachers and gurus. Okay, we're all teachers for each other, but there are very rare moments that a real guru appears, and when the disciple is ready, the guru comes, and when the guru is ready, the disciple comes to them as well. And so it's not necessary that everybody needs to have a guru in their life. I just happen to have chosen that path for myself, and that's what I've always concentrated on, the guru-disciple relationship. It's always worked for me. It's a hard road because if you have a real guru, they don't take any shit. And, you know, when I was living with Muktananda in Ganeshpuri, he carried a stick around. And if he saw your ego was out of line, you got that stick. I mean, he didn't beat people, but he gave you a nice hit that you would realize what you were doing was not correct. And, you know, I've gotten that from Amma a number of times. By the way, Amma is my guru, and I've been with her for 30 years. We just celebrated 30 years together, and she is, for me, the highest presence on the planet, certainly the highest female presence on the planet, and you know, that works for me. Now, a lot of people come to the gurus and they see stuff going around the gurus, which are the regular people, which I tell everybody, when you come to see a guru, don't have anything to do with anybody standing around Amma or working for her, because you're just going to get caught up in the same stuff and you'll become disillusioned. You're going to see the guru. That's all you're going for. Nothing else, because the shit is still there.
Right.
And it's really compounded because things come out in front of the gurus because that's what they're supposed to do, bring up all the shit. So Amma says to people when they ask, Amma, I want to come to India to your ashram. She says, you want to come to Amma's Mental Institute? Come on.
Sridhar, I want to ask you along these lines of gurus and guru-centric movements that over the years, there have been a number of gurus that have been involved in scandals, either, you know, sexually exploiting people, financial things, whatever. Maybe some is real, maybe some isn't real. We don't know. But if in those occasions when that happens, can somebody still be considered a guru and have flaws and faults like that, or is to be a guru, does one have to be beyond all that? It's a question that comes up to us a lot.
I know, and that's a really amazing, fantastic question. And, you know, when I was with Muktananda for 12 years, he fell from grace because he had some dalliances with younger girls, okay? And then after he left, people used to ask me that question, how could you stay with him when you saw that this was happening? I said, you know, I'm with the guru for deeper personal things that I get from them. Everyone has to take a shit at the end of the day, or during the day, whatever, and they all have to eat. And nobody's sitting on a platform that they're God reincarnated. I don't go for that one. And so, therefore, you have to look at everything, and certain things are going to come up, and how is your reaction to that going to be? Are you going to be in a place where, oh my God, they committed such a sin, I don't want to have anything to do with them? Or again, because you're getting so much from them, that I said to myself, you know, it far outweighs what I'm getting, that he fell from grace when he like the year before he died, he was 72, and then
82.
Well, whatever it was.
Muktananda
was 72.
When he died?
Yeah.
Oh, at his age, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah. It was in 1982. Yeah. And I said, I got so much from him that the other stuff didn't affect me. It did affect a lot of people, however, and this does affect a lot of people today because they're just not ready in their development to be able to assimilate, to understand it, and I'm very compassionate to that, and I do tell people because when we lived in Topanga, we had the Center for Spiritual Studies, which was the hosting nonprofit foundation that hosted all the Indian gurus that came to America throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They came to our place, and we saw everybody was there. We said Muktananda, Sachinanda, but Yogi Bhajan came when he first came to America that first weekend. Everybody came. Amma stayed there for 17 years. So it was and so many swamis and gurus throughout the ages. So we've had intimate contacts with a lot of them. And a lot of them have tried to come, current day people that have tried to come and ask to be on the Bhakti Fest thing, and we've declined because there was too much controversy around those people. It's a difficult area, and I'm glad you're asking those questions.
Yep.
Please continue to dive into those, because people have to be aware.
Right. It's a very, very honest answer. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Let's before we close, let's get back to Bhakti Fest, which is coming up. If people are hearing this before September, 4th?
It's September 6th to the 11th in
2017. Yeah.
Yeah, Joshua Tree Retreat Center. It's around 2.5 hours from L.A. We have great facilities, around 425 acres. A lot of our programs are indoors. We have 24-hour kirtan on the main stage that goes every day for 4 or 5 days. And we have a second stage called the Hanuman stage, where we actually introduce new up-and-coming kirtan sacred music acts, and we focus on that. We have a sound temple that goes on every night from 8 p.m. to 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, where people can come in and lay down and get gonged, and 15 vegetarian food booths serving all sorts of great food. We're known for our food. We have unlimited reverse osmosis water that's free for everybody, that they can stay hydrated. We have camping for 5,000 people. This year we're bringing in 20 new trailers, RVs, that people can rent and stay in there, all air-conditioned.
Oh, good.
We have 300 people on site in air-conditioned rooms. Some of those are still available. And we instituted last couple of years what's called a men's lodge and a women's lodge. Now, the women go into the women's lodge, and they're taught by spiritual elder women on spiritual contemporary subject matters, and we have the same for the men. No women are allowed in the men, and no men are allowed in the women. And there's a reason for that, because it comes down to, we can't talk to our mates or our partners and stuff like that about a lot of stuff. And that's what's causing a lot of the friction in the relationships today. We're just batting heads with our partners, whether the male, female, whatever the situation is, and we keep on batting heads, and we're not able to break through because we don't have people that are going through similar stuff or have been through similar stuff, so that we can relate to and talk to. So that's why we created these temples, these lodges that men go into and women, and they've been very well received. They're very packed, and they're only taught by spiritual elder men or women like that, who have established themselves and are already deep on the path, that they can impart some wisdom to the people coming into their class.
That's really interesting. Now, the sort of motto of Bhakti Fest is "Be in the Bhav," B-H-A-V.
Yeah, right.
So
let's
close with what that means, because I've been there and I know what it means, and you can feel it. It's palpable. And it's a great experience, but tell us about it.
Being in the Bhav means being in the moment, being in the love, being in the compassion, being able to absorb, be open. This is not a place to, there's thousands of people there, but you're not coming there to pick up a girl or pick up a guy. You're coming there to really dive into deepening your sadhana and building spiritual community. And you have to be able to understand that that's the most important thing we're doing now. All of us, because if we don't stay together, it's going to be very difficult living in today's world, especially in America now.
Right. Sridhar, one other question. You mentioned before that you had a book. What's the name of your book?
Well, I already did a couple of books. I published the book on Baba in America. That was the first thing our Center for Spiritual Studies did. That was on Baba's tour in America, which was actually banned from his bookstore subsequently.
Meaning Swami Muktananda.
Yeah, Swami Muktananda. Now, last year I came out with Every year, I just want to end with this piece about Ram Dass, because it's very important. So through my years of being friends with Ram Dass, I actually moved him over to Maui around 12, 15 years ago. He was actually dying in a small commune up in Northern California. Not many people know this. And I went up there to see him, and I said, Baba, these people are mistreating you. They're stealing your money. They're taking your credit cards and putting a pipe in your mouth at 7 in the morning and taking it out at midnight. And he said, Sridhar, mind your own business, and get out of here. And I went home back to Topanga, and I was so upset. I couldn't sleep for 3 days. I called him back, and I had to think about getting him out of there. And what could I do? I said, all right, I'm going to produce a retreat on Maui, and I'm going to invite him there. So I produced a retreat on Maui. It was Ram Dass, and I think it was Shiva Ray or something like that. It was in the early 2000s, 2002, something like that, or 4. And he came over. I flew him over. He was on death's doorknob. And I said, okay, Baba, you're not going to go back. And I put him into the hospital. I got him the best nurses and doctors, got him a house. I moved him around a couple of times, but I got houses donated to us. And with Wayne Dyer and myself and a couple of other people, we raised $250,000 for his care. And he never left the island at that time. And that's how he got to Maui. But every year, on our anniversary in April, since 2009, I go over that and we sit. I have 3 cameras going, interviewing, and I'm interviewing him on spiritual contemporary subject matters. Very good stuff for your listeners who are just learning or becoming interested in spirituality. These are great segues. You might want to watch them yourself. They're really, really informative. We get a lot of listeners on YouTube listening to them. So they're shown also at Bhakti Fest, but people can get a preview of what they are by going onto our website, bhaktifest.com. You can also buy tickets at that website, and you can also see these Ram Dass videos up on YouTube.
Great. Sridhar, thank you so much. Great.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it, and let's do it again sometime.
Okay, have a great time, and I'll see you around.
Great.
Okay,
And good luck with Bhakti Fest this year.